Hey everybody, welcome to Trading Capital's exclusive analysis. In today's video, we'll be discussing natural gas today, July 28th. Jumping to the daily chart of Nat Gas here. Overall, not impressed with the price action in terms of being bullish. This has been a significant decline ever since we put in that high volume attempt at breaking out here. You got a peekaboo breakout, and that was just met with absolute sell side pressure. So the thing about this is a notorious example of what it looks like to have a failed breakout on the daily chart. And they say, the biggest moves come from failed patterns. That's both on the bullish side and the bearish side. This just so happens to be a failed bullish breakout. And look at the torrential downpour we've had in Nat Gas. I mean, it just seems like we don't even use Nat Gas anymore. I mean, what a precipitous fall. From this high down here, we've already fallen 36%. Imagine being levered boil at the highs here. That would be insane. That's over 64% to the downside, probably a little bit more with the theta decay. Nevertheless, what are we looking at here in terms of Nat Gas? Full disclosure, I'm still looking to build into positions, but I've just started positions because there is a potential Nat Gas can go a little bit lower here. Although we're at some pretty impressive support here, backtesting this pivot high, this was your choppy price action consolidation before you had your epic breakout to the upside. So this area right here is a very, very big area for price action. You can see that we tested it once, bounced, got rejected off of a pretty critical trend line going all the way back on the daily chart here. Actually, let's go out to the weekly chart. You can see this little trend line going all the way back to this pivot low in 2020 and ultimately connecting through these lows, connecting through here. This is your breakout. That's where you got rejected off of the daily chart. So it's pretty evident to see that there's a solid resistance trend line in place, and that's going to be the level to beat. Now the question is, how low can we go, and are we going to go lower, or is this going to be the line in the sand for the Nat Gas bulls? Well, first things foremost, we're trading at 203 as of the close. It was a pretty bearish close, even on the weekly chart, closing at the dead lows on the weekly close, actually closing below the low of last week's low is not a good sign for the bulls. Nevertheless, $2 is a whole psychological number. It makes me think that we're at least at the minimum going to test that psychological $2 number because, again, a lot of people like to buy when we hit those whole numbers. So it's going to be interesting to see if we get any sort of a bounce off of that whole psychological number. There are some additional support levels and technical signals coming up into play. For instance, we have this daily chart gap fill sitting at 195. If you break through that, then it looks like we're probably going to head to this gap fill around 167. So obviously you can see that if we lose 195, there's a pretty big chance of flushing a fairly decent sized move all the way down to about 14%. So just recognize that there can be a little bit more risk to the downside. Now, what are the positives about trading into this area? Well, we're backtesting a previous little support zone. We do have a minor a bullish divergence on the daily chart, which just occurred on Friday's close. So what do I mean by that? Well, you can see the RSI here made a low. That was off of this low pivot. We had that bounce. Obviously, you had a bounce here in price action. Now price action has deteriorated and actually made a new low, but the RSI is maintaining a higher low. So I still think that maybe a little bit more downside to 195. And then I think that we're going to have a little bit more of a choppy consolidation period here. And the question is, are we going to maybe put in an inverse head and shoulders, or are we going to put in a bear flag here to go lower? We just don't have enough pieces to the puzzle right now. On the weekly chart, there is a concern here. What's the concern on the weekly chart? Well, the concern on the weekly chart is you could see on this RSI that we have this key trend line, right? Pivot low going all the way back to this previous January 2023. Then you hit your low here, which was all the way in February. You can see that the RSI weekly is still a fair amount away from support. So if we were to say test this pivot to pivot to pivot, that likely means that, believe it or not, we could potentially even take out this low here. So I know a lot of people in the grand scheme have been looking at this inverse head and shoulders potentially forming, just waiting for this right shoulder to potentially curl up. But the thing about this pattern is it has not triggered yet. And believe it or not, we're still putting in a major downtrend in Nat Gas. Why is that? Well, first things first. I mean, if we look at the technical structure of this market on a weekly chart, right? What is this? This is your high. This is a lower high. This is another lower high, another lower high. This is your attempt at getting a higher high, and then you failed. So the question is, are we going to make a lower low? That is the big thing that I'm watching for. So just understand, even though we're oversold, this asset is notorious for having exogenous moves in both directions. And then the next support, if we were to break that 195, you can see you have this beautiful little trend line, pivot low to pivot low. That might be where we're going. Just understand, if you're trying to accumulate these stocks or this commodity on the long side, have it in your playbook that 160 is a potential target, which means that Nat Gas could still fall a little bit of about 20%. Now, I'm still building into position. I want to see, I wouldn't mind Nat Gas going to 160 because that just means I get to buy this commodity much, much cheaper. Now, additional insights. Let's look at some of the Nat Gas equity stocks. AR, trading into a little bit of support here. You can see this backtesting this parallel channel. But the problem with this AR chart is that you're actually losing this 382 fib. So there's a potential that we could go to 2684 on the chart. But nevertheless, I do think that this pattern is still just consolidating and trying to build a base. EQT is an interesting one because this is one that's at some pretty epic technical support, and it's traded some extreme volume, and it's now had earnings out of the way. So I like the fact that EQT is showing some signs of accumulation here. A lot of volume traded in this vicinity. We do have what's potentially forming is this falling wedge pattern. And again, falling wedge patterns have a statistically much higher probability of actually breaking out to the upside. So I think that there's signs in the resource space in a variety of different names that are actually giving us signs that Nat Gas is being accumulated. So they typically say these resource stocks lead on both the upside and the downside, and speculation is still showing signs of accumulation. I mean, you look at LNG. That's had a phenomenal move to the upside despite Nat Gas's decline. Another utility play that has exposure to Nat Gas is CPK. So a lot of these charts obviously are showing some signs that are mixed price action. Some are depressed, some have broken out, some are showing signs of heavy volume accumulation. So there's a lot of mixed signals going across the entire energy natural gas space, and it's just going to be really interesting to see how this shapes up. But a word to the wise, please don't put your full portfolio into this commodity because it has a tendency to sniff out when people are exposed to the downside. Hopefully everyone's learned something about this. One other thing, one tidbit of information, okay? We're going to erase everything here on Nat Gas, and we're going to throw on the 50 moving average and the daily 200 moving average. Okay, I've been touching on Nat Gas. I've been trying to warn people when we were up here, do not buy this breakout. Do not. I was selling with my members up here and shorting Nat Gas. And why? Well, we got that golden cross where the 50 intersected with the 200, and that typically signals a sell side signal in the short term. And look at the sell side signal. Really from June 24th on this candle here, sorry, June 21st on this candle here, when we got the golden cross, it's pretty much been a torrential downpour to the downside. So what's interesting is I'm watching now the inverse signal. You got the golden cross here, it results in a sell. I'm watching for this 50 to intersect with the 200 in a downtrend. That is called the death cross. Usually when that happens, believe it or not, it's actually a buy signal. So we watched the golden cross for weeks. Now we're going to watch the death cross. Once we get that death cross, that is likely a buy signal or at least a dead cat bounce, a trend reversal bounce. So hopefully this analysis helps. Hopefully everyone's learned a little bit. Please give it a like down below. Comment if you disagree or agree. I'm happy to hear more perspectives.